Story 1. I had been killed 3 times, in 3 different ways, on 3 consecutive days, by 3 different men. I had been killed over and over again for the past 4 days. I couldn't tell whether this nightmare had only started happening 4 days ago, or if it had been going on for much longer, and I'd just noticed it recently. 4 days ago, I lived my life as usual. Nothing strange had happened, until I passed by a blonde white man wearing a jumper. The man didn't seem unusual, and I didn't remember ever meeting him. However, as he walked past me, he suddenly pulled a gun from his jacket, pointed it at my face, and pulled the trigger. It happened so fast that I barely remember anything about it. I woke up the next morning with that memory vivid in my mind. It was just a nightmare, I told myself. But I was wrong. It wasn't. Later that day, as I went out to buy groceries, I passed a bald white man wearing a t-shirt and jeans. I'd never met him before. Now, he looked nothing like the man in my dream, but they shared one thing in common. They both killed me. As he walked past me, he pulled a hammer from under his shirt and swung it toward the back of my head. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my room. No wounds, no blood, just the memory of 2 different men killing me in 2 different ways on 2 consecutive days. At first, I thought it was just a strange dream within a dream, but I was wrong. It wasn't. On the 3rd day, as I was about to get into my car, a young man appeared out of nowhere. He pulled a knife from under his clothes and stabbed me in the chest. I had been killed 3 times, in 3 different ways, on 3 consecutive days. Something strange was happening. On the 4th day, I decided to take control. I sneaked out of my house, careful and watchful. I was searching for any of the 3 men who had killed me. Lucky for me, I found one. The man with the hammer. I hid in an alley and waited for him to pass before grabbing him and dragging him into the shadows. I managed to knock him unconscious and tie him to a chair. When he woke up, it took hours of interrogation before he finally spoke. "If I were you, I wouldn't want to know," he said. He sighed, then continued his explanation. An explanation I never expected to hear and could barely believe. According to him, the town I lived in was an artificial town created in an underground facility called Crime Zone. The facility served one purpose: to provide a space where any crime could be committed legally. The facility had many levels, each dedicated to a specific crime. The first floor was for robbery, the second for assault, the third for rape, the fourth for murder, and so on. The deeper the level, the more horrifying the crimes. The reason for this facility? Human nature. No matter how good life seems, there's always a dark corner in the human mind. People commit crimes out of anger, lust, or worse. The facility was created to let people indulge their monstrous urges in a controlled environment, ensuring the outside world remains safe and free from crime. Outside the facility, any crime, even the smallest, was punishable by death. "Okay, say you're telling the truth," I shouted. "What about me? What about us, the people who live here? Are we just here to satisfy the twisted desires of others?" "That's the thing," he said. "You're not supposed to remember any of this." He paused. "This town is the 4th floor, the murder zone. You live your life day by day, remembering everything except the murders that happened to you. But somehow you remember," he added. "It seems like there's an error happening in your system." "An error? I'm not a machine," I yelled. The man chuckled. "Maybe not, but in a way, you are. You're an artificial human." "Artificial human? That's ridiculous. I bleed just like anyone else." "No, not androids. Artificial humans," he clarified. "Like clones, but not exactly. You're not real. Stop wasting your time. Let the agents fix you, and everything will go back to normal." Before I could respond, I felt a sudden electric shock from behind. I fell forward, unable to move. My vision blurred, and sounds became distant, but I could still hear bits of the conversation. "What took you so long? I paid for this." The man shouted at 2 officers in military uniforms who had appeared to untie him. "We apologize," one of them said. "It looks like we need to run diagnostics on all artificial residents." "It's sad," the first officer said, looking at me. "His only purpose is to be killed, over and over, every single day." "Yeah, and now with this kind of error happening to him," the second officer added, "there's a risk he'll be recycled." Story 2. My wife died from cancer last year. I grieved, drinking alone inside our remote farmhouse for months, until I found an antique arsenic bottle in the stream that cut through our woods. And a strange woman shortly after paid me a night visit. As I sit here now beside my pond and watch the autumn fog dance along the water, and as the leaves whisper and chatter to one another as the wind lets them, I think of my wife, and how sorry I am. I can't live the rest of my days here like she wanted, on our little 12-acre farm, our little quiet heaven, Or at least that's what it was supposed to be. But the land holds secrets. I know now, without a lingering question in my heart, that hell exists. I wish that gave me comfort, because that means that Diana is waiting for me at our next quiet little heaven, one that doesn't mock the search for peace. But it doesn't. Once the sun winks its red eye closed and retires for the evening, I'll be gone from this place. But there are two things I need to do first, and one of them is to write this down before I put it behind me forever. Although a part deep inside of me, the part that can't be lied to, knows that the curtain will never close on me again no matter where I go, knows that I'm forever and always awake. Cancer took her last year. She was 37. There are a million words in me I could say about losing her. The shock, the denial, the hope lost, and the twinkle in her eyes that was lost with it. The pain, those nonsense last words. The last breath? She's gone now. That's all that matters. We'd bought a 12-acre homestead in southern Illinois to escape the city. The house had been built in 1898 as a colonial revival home and was more or less falling apart, but there was a secluded rural charm about it. It sat on a strip of land several miles off of any main road, with fields used for harvesting corn nestling the house on either side, and behind it was a fenced-in pasture that shot back into the woods, which was perfect for our two horses. When we did the tour, we sat on the porch and looked out at what might have been the most peaceful view we'd ever seen, with fields of wheat yawning and bowing in the wind like a sea of gold across from us. I could see in her eyes that she was in love, and so we made our minds up to make an offer right then and there. During the final walkthrough, the sellers had forgotten they'd changed the locks. They were going through what was apparently a rough divorce, and our agent had to call the estranged wife in to give us access to the home. She was amiable enough when she arrived and gave us a handful of apologies for not remembering to provide a new set of keys. But what struck me as odd, even then, was that she had seemed reluctant to step onto the property at all. She parked her car on the gravel road about 100 feet in front of the house and talked to us from there. And when she wasn't sure which key it was on her keychain to hand to us, she looked disquieted. She walked briskly to the house and fumbled with her keys and the deadbolt until she finally found the right one and opened the door without walking in, pulling her hand away from the doorknob like it was something hot to the touch. She said something about needing to get some fresh air, told the agent to bring her keys after locking up, and then hurried back to her car. I thought there may have just been bad memories of the marriage that she didn't want to revisit, or that she maybe felt awkward, or that she was intruding. It all makes sense now. We knew we had our work cut out for us from the beginning, and when we settled in, it was one thing after another. Leaking toilets, bad insulation, water damage. But we were happy now. Diana got sick not long after, but I'm truly grateful for that short period of time when we would work on our old farmhouse, drink coffee, and watch the sunrise from our front porch, taking in all of the life around us. After she passed, her sister took her horses as agreed, as well as our two dogs temporarily. The dogs weren't my original plan, but I was taking everything pretty hard and just needed to be alone for a while. Just needed some quiet, which I didn't get anyway because of the damned wind, with its constant howling and moaning through the windows. My drinking had overtaken me. There are large gaps in my memory, especially right after. I drank from the bottle like the evening's watery haze would drink me in return, hoping it would dissolve me into nothing. One morning I'd woken up to a massive hangover that felt like it couldn't be cured by anything other than the sun and a walk, so I threw on some coveralls and went on into the woods behind the property. I'd known there was a stream or a creek of some kind that ran east through it, but the thorns and brush were so overgrown I couldn't see through more than 10 or so feet. There was a supposed path of some kind that led to the stream, and I thought if I could just push my way through enough, I'd eventually run into it. It only took me about 5 minutes until an overgrown but manageable clearing revealed itself and led me to the small stream, a steady flow of water running through it. It was only about 6 or so inches deep, but had carved its own winding path deep into the dirt over the years. I followed, thinking I'd see the tracks of various animals nearby that came to drink from it, and I did. I continued on, and in the water, I started seeing these broken fragments of bottles. They were old, very old, softened and smoothed by water and sediment and time. They were the kind of bottles you'd see on a movie set in some 19th century period piece film, with deep brown and emerald glass, with all of those gaudy, oblong angles, like some sort of snake oil elixir. There were just a few scattered fragments at first, but the further I trudged on, the more abundant the shards became, until I came to the stream's watershed, and just beyond that was an opening in the ground that looked like some sort of den, big enough to walk in if I crouched. There must have been a dozen or so broken bottles in front of it. It was like someone had dumped them in a hurry all at once, or had drunk them in unison and then smashed them for some reason. Jutting out of the sand in the water was a green bottle that seemed like it had remained intact over the years. It had two circular finger handles on either side of its neck, and some kind of impressed label in the glass, but the letters were immersed, and I couldn't make them out. I pulled it free and rinsed it in the water, and I was just able to make out the smooth letters stamped into the glass. Arsenic. Bottles of poison. But why? Why here? And how had this been here all these years, without being found or picked up by hunters or one of the previous owners? I reached into my pocket to take a picture of the whole scene with my phone, but realized I had forgotten it. The hole bellowed at me as if commanding me to gaze into its swallowing darkness, and although I couldn't see anything, I felt I was being watched from within it. A coldness crawled up my spine. I shoved the bottle into the big front pocket of my coveralls and made my way back, not being able to help but check behind me several times along the way. When I got back to the house, I poured myself a neat glass of whiskey. It was still early in the afternoon, but hunting for little treasures on the land was something Diana had loved to do, and so the thought of coming across such a strange find made the antique arsenic bottle quite heavy in my pocket. I thought I'd lighten it with bourbon, placed the old, green bottle on my coffee table, and sat across from it on my couch, and I sipped my drink. I stared at it in my quiet, empty house. Quiet save for the wind. I sipped again. It was so interesting. I thought deeply on how it got there, how it hadn't been found in, well, I don't know, 130 years? Maybe more? I knew arsenic had been used in tonics and pesticides before they knew how deadly it was, but it just seemed such a strange place for them to be. I thought maybe the isolation and grief had made me paranoid. I sipped my drink again. I poured another glass, and then a few more. The room went orange as the low sun came through the glass, and the wind howled through the poorly sealed windows. The old poison bottle had entranced me, and in staring at it, I'd lost track of time. Things went soft around the edges and the whiskey numbed my tongue, glass after glass. But I remember at some point I'd imagined it had comforted me, spoken to me with silent words. Drink it, had said. Drink it in. And I did. It knew my pain and wanted it gone. I sunk into the bottle and faded with the evening. I awoke on the couch with a massive hangover. The bottle still staring. An empty one that had housed the whiskey the night before now rested beside it. I fumbled around in the medicine cabinet for some spare aspirin and forced them down with some water from the sink and went to the front porch to sit in my favorite chair and catch some crisp morning air. When I stepped outside, I noticed that the chair had been turned around, toward the windows, facing right into my living room where I had slept the night before. It had been pulled close to the glass, almost like whoever was sitting in it wanted to be as close as possible to get a better view of the inside. It had to have been me, I'd thought, but why the hell would I do that? The wind had been howling and was known to blow things around, sometimes clear into the yard, but this chair was made out of cured oak and weighed 30, maybe 40 pounds. It didn't seem likely to have moved it. This heavy, floral smell clung to the wood, like some sort of gaudy lavender perfume you'd find buried in some box in your grandmother's basement. Not thinking of the absurdity of it, I went back inside and sniffed the mouth of the old bottle. Nothing but the remnant smell of water. The pain from the hangover pulled the turned chair to the back of my mind. I had been in a drunken stupor and could have fumbled around out there, doing God knows what. I only managed to make it a few hours before heading to the liquor store to grab another bottle. I sat back on my couch, across from the old green bottle and its drained companion from the night before, and I drank in silence, just like it wanted me to. Sometime during the night, maybe 11 or so, but it's hard to say. I was very drunk. I was browsing my phone from my couch, and 3 soft knocks tapped at my door. I didn't see any car lights come down the gravel road that ran adjacent to my house. Maybe one of the neighbors needed something, I'd thought. For reasons I can't quite comprehend, I offered a consulting glance at the bottle on the table. It told me to answer in its wordless way, and I listened. I got up and went for the door, flipping the light switch to the porch on, and remembering there had been a short in the wires. I opened it. There stood a thin young woman, faintly bathed in what little light the only lamp in the living room offered. It was hard to make out her features, but she looked like she might have been in her early to mid-20s. Her hair was long and looked like it could have been a light brown, draping halfway down her back. She wore this white embroidered nightgown that might have been beautiful, except even in the timid light I could see dirt on it in several places. The shadows hid much of her face, but even then she looked pallid, her eyes bringing about this astounded look on her face as if she were confused or lost. I stood there with my drink in my hand, unsure of what to say or how to address such a strange and unexpected visitation in the middle of the night. She said that she was sorry for disturbing me, but that she was looking for her dog. She said she lived about a mile down the road and had been hearing prairie wolves the past few nights, and her dog had run off into the woods and was nowhere to be found. She said she was getting very worried they might have tricked him into chasing after them, I told her I hadn't seen or heard of any coyotes, and then asked her about the dog. She said he was a collie, and his name was Copper. I looked down and noticed she didn't have any shoes on, and her feet were covered in mud. Did you go running through the woods in a gown without shoes on to look for him? I asked her. She glanced down and studied her muddied feet with that same surprised look and said nothing. I thought maybe she was drunk or medicated, but she looked harmless, and the whiskey had always made me well disposed. I told her to wait a moment, and I'd go get a towel so she could wipe her feet off and could come inside and warm up for a moment. Then, we'd take a spotlight to go looking for him. As I reached to close the door handle and grab a towel, I noticed her eyes, so dazed and cloudy and confused before, now sprung alive in the dark with a distilled intensity, focusing in on the green arsenic bottle that sat on my coffee table. She took a single, eager step toward it, stopping just before my doorway. I held my hand out to halt her, a little startled by the approach but still attempting to be polite. She gave a sheepish grin and shook her head. "I'm deeply sorry. The cold has made me too eager for warmth this evening," she said. It was so fast I could have easily missed it, but as she smiled I noticed the inside of her upper lip stuck to her teeth, lagging on one side before breaking free as if her mouth had been exceptionally dry. The flesh of her lips looked harder than usual. Stiffer, thin slivers of her dark gums revealing themselves. The whiskey had dulled my senses, but when she stepped in closer, I also noticed a lavender perfume smell on her and thought of the chair outside. She could have just been dehydrated for all I knew, but the whole thing just felt off, felt wrong. I closed the door and caught her glance at the bottle with that same look again, unable to will her eyes from peering at it. I stood there for a moment, hands still on the doorknob, and then flicked the deadbolt locked with careful fingers. I thought about calling the police at that instant. It was weird, sure, but I'd ran out after our dogs half-dressed, with no shoes on before when they chased deer or a passing car or something, so it wasn't unthinkable. But that smell, there was no mistaking it. Behind me, I could feel the bottle was displeased. Let her in. I shook my head at it and then downed the rest of my drink. "No? Pardon?" I could hear her say from the other side of the door. "Actually, I'm very sorry, but it's late. I can call someone for you if you like. I'll keep an eye out for Copper, and we'll take him to your house if he turns up." "Which house did you say it was down the road again?" There was a pause that felt like an eternity. "Oh," she said, finally, not answering my question. She sounded disappointed, not angry or insulted, just let down. I opened my mouth to apologize again, but the words never managed to crawl out of it. I lied. The lamp's dim light didn't reach far enough to illuminate the porch through the windows. But in the darkness, I thought I could see the silhouette of a head tilt its way into view from the side of the windows the front door had been butted up against. The soft creaks of graceful bare feet on wooden steps groaned as she left the porch, and she walked into the night without saying another word. I grabbed my 9mm and made my way around the other doors to double-check the locks. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. "Prairie wolves," I said to myself as I poured more bourbon into my glass. Who calls them that these days? A part of me felt guilty. Maybe I'd just sent a poor girl with a missing dog back into the cold. But her mouth, that perfumed smell on her that saturated my chair the night before. How she looked at the green bottle on my table. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't think she could pose any real physical threat to me, but I felt uneasy, unalone. I took another drink from the glass. I pulled my phone out to call the police, trying my best to stay out of the line of sight of the front windows. Although I'd heard her walk off moments earlier, I couldn't help but feel naked through the glass. I got ready to dial the local station's number, but the old green bottle beckoned me over to it. "Drink it," had said. And I did. I thumbed my phone back into my pocket and sunk back into the couch, and drank myself into an empty void. 3 empty bottles greeted me from the table in the morning, the newest member lying on its side. I was on the floor. Even with the throbbing headache, I thought of the strange woman, and how I managed to get drunk instead of calling the police. I looked around. The house was trashed. I hadn't cleaned it in weeks. Hadn't even swept up the clumps of dog hair that accumulated in the corners of the rooms and under the furniture from months before. And now my drinking had gotten so bad, I couldn't even manage to call the police before blacking out. Diana would have been heartbroken if she'd seen this. She hated my drinking. I let shame hit me like a puff of heavy smoke. And then, I called the sheriff. As I dialed, I could still feel that green arsenic bottle pulling my gaze toward it, weighing the room down from that coffee table and anchoring everything in place, drawing me in like a dancing fire in the dark. The sheriff came by not long after, and I told her what had happened the night before, that a strange young woman was knocking on my door in the middle of the night but hadn't actually done anything illegal that I could be sure of, but that she might have been trespassing on my property the previous night and might have been on drugs. I told the sheriff where the woman said she came from and asked her if she knew any of the homes along the road the woman had described to me. She said there was only one within a few miles on that particular stretch, but the house had been condemned 20 or so years. She said drugs had gotten pretty bad in the neighboring town, and it was possible the problem had made its way to the more rural parts of the area. She told me she would ask around in the area to see if any of the other homes experienced anything similar, and then offer to check in throughout the night. I told her it wasn't necessary, and that I had plenty of guns in the house to protect myself with, if it came to that. After the sheriff left, I uncorked my bottle and poured a glass. I just needed to take the edge off. When I looked over at the coffee table, I noticed the antique bottle was gone. Panicked, I searched the house for it for 15 or so minutes before I realized I'd put it in my coat pocket before the sheriff came by earlier, just to keep it close. A few hours later, as the sun was going down, I went around back near the gated strip that led to our pond and pasture that was butted up against the woods, where Diana's horses used to be. There had been some equipment I'd left out there for weeks, and there was supposed to be a storm coming that evening, and so I'd wanted to move everything into the barn. When I got back to the gate, I noticed it had been opened, which was something I never did, even with the horses gone. In the fading light, I made out footprints along a thin, beaten path that ran through the center of the strip where the horses used to walk up to get feed. Bare footprints, from small bare feet. She had walked through the woods, through the pasture to come knocking on my door. I thought I could make out at least 2 sets going both toward the house and then back down the path again, but with overcast blocking the moon and stars, it was getting hard to see anything. I followed the footprints 200 or so yards until I could see them cut down into the pasture and to the gate that led into the woods. It had also been left open. I reached for the old green bottle for comfort and realized I'd left it in the house. I needed my gun, and I needed to call the sheriff. And I needed that goddamn bottle. I began making my way back to the house when I saw the woman walking past the pond and the mausoleum where Diana rested and heading toward the house. She would have been impossible to make out in the dark if it weren't for that white gown. I yelled out to her and started running before tripping over some broken wire fencing that was on the ground. She either ignored me or couldn't hear my voice through the rustling corn, which had begun to move with the wind from the oncoming storm. I was just too far away from her. She made her way to the house with this calm grace and then went around it to the front. I realized my gun had been on my table, in plain sight, and I hadn't locked my door. I'd been drinking until I was numb, just like that fucking bottle had told me to. Made myself careless and stupid. Hammers and a machete in the barn, but it was in the opposite direction, and by the time I grabbed one of them, she could easily have been inside the house for a minute, maybe more. The best thing I could find on the way was a little trench shovel in the garden. I grabbed it. When I got around to the front of the house, the door had been cracked half open. She'd gone inside. The wind blew harder and began its howling, now carrying cold pellets of rain that stung as they hit my face. My legs didn't want to approach the house, but slowly, I did. That middle step to the porch creaking the loudest it ever had, even in the wind and the rain. I pushed the door open further with the tip of the shovel. The whiskey bottles that had made themselves so comfortable next to the old green poison bottle were scattered about the floor. The green bottle gone. The gun was still sitting there, untouched. I grabbed it. I looked around for my phone but didn't see it in sight. I could hear her walking around upstairs, in what sounded like Diana's office. I aimed my gun into the darkness toward the top of the stairs and yelled out to her, "Come out of there! I'll fucking shoot you if I have to." The creaking floorboards stopped for a moment, and then she walked out onto the landing, an obscure phantom in the dark, except for the faint lunar glow of her gown, except for the whites of her confounded eyes. She had the bottle in her hands, and she seemed to be crying. Her hands were shaking. "Don't drop it," I said lowly, eagerly. She tilted the bottle up above her head and stuck her tongue in the opening of its neck, desperate for something that hadn't been inside of it for well over a century. Her tongue made this squelching noise as she did it, as if it were much, much too dry. She gave me a distraught look and cried harder. The wind moaned through the windows, through the darkness of the house. I'd never felt more alone in my life. "Isn't it working, Elijah?" she asked me from the top of the stairs. I didn't know what to say, nor did I have any clue who Elijah was. The woman had clearly lost her mind. I had to make sure she put the bottle down before she broke it. "Come on down, we'll just talk about it." She cradled the bottle tighter, taking slow steps down the staircase and stopping at its base. "It didn't work for me," she said in the dark, sobbing as the words left her. I lowered my gun and reached for the lamp on the island in the kitchen near the foot of the stairs. And for the first time, I truly saw her. She wasn't much more than an emaciated skeleton. Her skin was hardened and yellowed and pulled tight to her. She looked not much different than Diana did on her hospice bed just before the end. No doubt, if I would have left her in her bed a few days after she'd passed away, They would have been hard to tell apart. I should have been terrified, and a part of me was, but she looked so helpless, so pitiful, like a child holding a teddy bear. This overwhelming sensation of sadness filled me. "Why did it work for you and not me, Elijah?" she asked me again. I set my gun on the table. Elijah. I thought for a moment about whether or not to correct her on who I was, and decided it didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. I asked her what she meant. Her eyes sobered like she realized I wasn't whoever this person was for a moment, and then she retreated. "It calls to me, but why am I still here and you're not?" I didn't respond, but I felt her words. I'd felt them in me every day since Diana had gone. "And the others?" she asked. I began crying with her. "I'm so sorry." At this, she regarded me, then winced with a tender pain and looked away. She tried drinking from the bottle again in vain. I reached out and touched her arm gently to stop her. Her skin was cold and hard. She sobered her gaze once more, and for a moment the faintest smile rose on her face. And then she retreated again for the last time, into whatever life she had known when she was still alive. I guided her gently to the door, her bottle still cradled close to her, and stood in the doorway as she left. I wanted to hold on to it more than anything, but it didn't belong to me. I asked her, "Was there ever even a copper at all? Have you seen him?" she asked. I shook my head. She turned and moved around the house. I walked into the yard and to the side and watched her go on, back through the pasture and into the woods, the rain and the wind blowing her hair and gown like wild rags. She never looked back once, and then she was gone. The next few days I did a deep dive into county records, trying to find anyone who ever owned a home in the area named Elijah, but nothing turned up. It was as if she, and whoever Elijah were, never existed at all. I don't know exactly what happened to her, but I feel like she was warning me in the only way she was capable, to avoid whatever hell she had found herself in. Every day I fight the urge to go back into those woods and see if that bottle is back where I found it. I catch myself walking towards the trees that lead to the stream, to that hole, and inevitably to that bottle, but I don't dare go in. She'd no doubt come looking to reclaim it, like she's likely done many times before, and if she didn't, I don't think I'll be strong enough to part with it again, which is why I'm writing this. I said that I have 2 things to do before I leave, and writing this down had to come first, so you might understand when the realtor tells you why there's an abandoned mausoleum near the pond in the back pasture. I can't let Diana stay here. I'm taking her with me and reburying her closer to our hometown, near the place we first met. Someday, I'll revisit that place in the woods and see if I can do something. Anything for the woman. But I'm not strong enough to face it. Not yet. Even now, I can feel the pull of that bottle out in the stream, begging me to come back and take it. And even as I write this, I can feel I'm being watched from the tree line, and I get this feeling that it isn't her this time. Story 3. My family doesn't remember who I am. I've been stuck in my dorm all semester trying to keep my head above water, clawing at my face in the middle of the night as I struggled to keep my eyes glued to my computer. When finals week finished, I was eager to get the hell out of there, but I didn't receive the homecoming I was expecting, and the reality of my new situation is slowly killing me inside. I flew home the week after Christmas, carry-on in hand. I walked into the airport lobby expecting to see my family waiting for me, anxious to greet me after months away. But nobody was there. I stood there awkwardly scanning the crowd of travelers, hoping to catch a glimpse of a familiar face. But the more I searched, the more disappointment built up in my chest. Clutching my phone, I stared at the screen awaiting a text, a call, any sign that would let me know someone was coming. That sign never came. It'd been about 30 minutes after deboarding when I decided to call my dad, but his number went straight to voicemail. It was odd. My dad never had his phone off. I called my mom, and after a few rings, the pre-recorded message played from the other end. The robotic voice filled me with sadness, the tone disingenuous and cold. "We're sorry. Phone number can't come to the phone right now." Knowing that they would eventually call back, I took a seat in the waiting area. An hour came and went, and I was still awaiting their call. I tried Dad's phone again and perked up when the line actually rang this time. 3 rings later, my dad's throaty voice came through the speaker. "Hello? Did you forget something?" I said, annoyed. There was a pause, as I heard my dad's breathing distance itself from his phone. I pictured him playfully looking at the screen, feigning confusion. His breathing returned to the speaker, and I patiently awaited the punchline. I rolled my eyes when it came. "I'm sorry, who is this?" Should have known this was one of his pranks, and huffed my frustration through the call. "I'm at the airport. Are you coming to get me?" A second pause came, this time lingering, fermenting in the palpable tension. "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number." He's never known when to end a ruse. "Dad." The third pause was just as long, and only ended when I heard the jingle telling me that the call had ended. I was stunned, the lengths this man would go to just to play his little game. When I called back, the line rang, but he didn't answer. I'm sorry, number can't come to the phone. I angrily ended the call and dialed again. Once again, the robotic voice greeted me instantly. I'm sorry. I was fuming. The Uber ride home was not a happy endeavor. A scowl plastered on my face the whole time, as the views of town felt sour under the ridiculous circumstances. As soon as I walked through the door, my dad would be on the floor laughing his ass off at the minor inconvenience he caused me. It would be the highlight of his week. The car came to a stop outside our house, the familiar lettering on the mailbox bringing slight relief in the shitstorm that was my life. I was finally home. Luggage in hand, I walked up to the door and gripped the knob, but when I tried turning it, it wouldn't budge. It was the last thing I needed. My fury spilled out through my knuckles as I bashed my hand on the door. Dad, open the door, I'm here! There was movement in the window, the curtains swaying behind the blinds. Someone was watching me from the other side. I waved and the blinds fluttered closed. Aries. They were really outdoing themselves this time. Footsteps walked across the floor on the other side of the walls and stopped just on the opposite end of the door. The knob unlatched, and the door swayed on its hinges, letting out an anguished creak. Someone was peering out of the small crack, their gaze dismissive and cold. How can I help you? I was clenching my fists, the joints in my hands snapping under the pressure. Ha, very funny, I said, as I touched the door and tried pushing it aside. My dad's eyes panicked as the door pushed against his hands, and he fought my push with one of equal strength. Wow. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Taken aback by his sudden conviction, I cowered back, stepping off the welcome mat. I'd never heard my dad curse. Here. He opened the door the rest of the way, revealing a wooden bat in his hand, his knuckles white with intent. His shoulders were stiff and hands shaky. He looked ready to use it, but the fear in his eyes hoped he wouldn't have to. Dad? I questioned. The quizzical look he gave me was gut-wrenching. It's me, Maya. You what head? Your daughter. My mom peered over his shoulder. Honey, what's going on? When her eyes met me, she yelped. Without breaking his connection with me, my dad answered her question. This person says their name is Maya. He paused, still calculating the situation himself. Our daughter. Horror washed over my mom's expression, and the words snagged in her throat. My dad finally glanced over at her, confirming the apparent absurdity of the situation. When their eyes returned, my dad raised the bat, shoving it in my chest. Look, I don't know if you're crazy, having some kind of a psychotic breakdown, or just some stalker, but you are not Maya. You. Disgust fluctuated his voice as he eyed me up and down. Are not my daughter. The prank had long outstayed its welcome, and I fought the awkwardness with a fragile giggle, but tears began forming in my eyes. Crackling emotion accompanied the words that left my mouth. Mom, Dad, this isn't funny anymore. My dad bared his teeth, a primal display of anger, a premonition of violence. His jaw unlatched, and I saw the fury start to wallow up from his chest, but before he could say anything, a chilling voice drifted from inside the house. Dad, what's going on? She stepped up behind my mom, craning over both of them, trying to get a look at the spectacle at the door. A void formed in the center of my chest as I recognized the person standing behind my parents. It was me, Millie. It was like staring into a mirror. The blonde hair, glasses, eyes, mouth, tone of voice, an identical twin, a doppelganger, an imposter. Shock rang in my ears, and the world became distant, muted. It was as if a bomb had gone off beside me. I was woozy, fighting not to hyperventilate. The head of the bat pushed the air out of my lungs. Hey, stop looking at her like that, you freak. I had been staring at the duplicate, but wasn't sure for how long. My mom cradled her baby in her arms, protecting the girl, protecting me from myself. My dad gently placed the bat under my chin and forced my face in his direction. Look at me, you freak. If I see you around here or near my daughter again, I will take this bat and smash your head in. Do you hear me? Too stunned to say anything, I just stared at him. The bat shoved me back a few feet. Do you hear me? He growled. My mom held him back. Honey, that's enough? My dad lowered the bat but kept it at the ready. Now get the hell out of here before I call the cops. My mind sputtered and my feet started moving. It was as if I was on autopilot, as if my body was protecting me from enduring more heartbreak. When I got to the sidewalk, the door slammed, and I was left out in the cold, like a piece of trash. I wandered the street for a while, my luggage rolling behind me as I tried to figure out my next move and what the hell was going on. I eventually came across a corner store and shuffled my way inside. The clerk gave me a strange look as I walked through the door. I asked for the bathrooms, and he pointed me to the back of the store, eyeing me warily as I made my way in that direction. A woman was stepping out of one of the stalls as I walked inside and jolted when she saw me. I tried smiling at her, but she didn't return the gesture. She scurried out of the bathroom in a rush. I thought it was strange, but with so much going on, I put it out of my mind. That is, until I walked up to the mirror and saw what everyone else saw. His beard was long, gray, and matted. The wrinkles on his face were deep, skin leathery. There was this smothered filth across his brows, as if he'd been standing near a coal fire all night. I reached for the glass and wiped at its surface, hoping the image would self-correct. When it didn't, I touched my face. The loose skin didn't bounce back as my fingers dragged across my cheeks. The warmth of my tears streaked down my face and soaked into the fibers of the man's beard in the mirror. The store clerk's reflection came into frame. "Sir, this is the women's bathroom. You can't be in here." Story 4. My boyfriend disappeared, but the more I search for him, the more I'm losing myself. It started with a voicemail. "Hey, it's me. Call me back when you get this, okay? I've been thinking about what you said, and I just need to talk to you." That was it. That was the last time I heard from Noah. I replayed the message so many times, I memorized every hesitation, every crack in his voice. I tried calling him back, of course, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I figured he needed space. Noah always did this when life got overwhelming. He'd retreat for a day or two, hole up in his apartment with his records and a bottle of whiskey. But when a day stretched into a week, then 2, I knew something was wrong. I filed a missing persons report. His friends hadn't heard from him. His job said he stopped showing up after taking an extended leave of absence. His apartment was empty. The rent paid months in advance. It was like he'd just evaporated. But I couldn't let it go. I went through every scrap of his life, tearing apart his social media, scrolling through our old texts, even digging into the corners of his past he'd been reluctant to share. There had to be something, a clue, a thread to pull. And that's when I found the notebook. It was buried under a pile of papers in a drawer of his desk. The cover was plain black, the kind you'd find in any office supply store. But when I opened it, I realized it was a journal. And not just any journal. This was his life. Dates, places, people, thoughts scrawled in his jagged handwriting. But the farther I read, the stranger it got. He wrote about shadows following him, about waking up in places he didn't recognize, about a voice he could hear whispering his name at night. "I think they're watching me," one entry said. "I see them in the corner of my eye, but when I turn, they're gone." Another. "I don't know if I'm going insane or if something's really there, but it's getting worse. I can't trust anyone, not even her." The date on that one was a week before he disappeared. I reread that last line, "not even her," over and over until the words blurred. Did he mean me? I became obsessed. Every waking hour was consumed by Noah's disappearance and the fragments he'd left behind. I found myself walking the places he wrote about in his journal. The coffee shop on 12th Street, the old bridge over the river, the abandoned lot behind the factory. At first, it felt like I was retracing his steps, but then things started to shift. It was subtle at first. My reflection in the mirror lingered a second too long. I'd hear footsteps when I was alone, soft and deliberate, like someone following me. Once, I caught a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision. A shadow, tall and thin. But when I turned, there was nothing there. The more I searched for Noah, the more I felt myself unraveling. And then, there were the dreams. Every night, I'd find myself in a darkened version of somewhere familiar. My apartment, my office, the park where Noah and I used to meet. The shadows were always there, standing in the distance, their heads tilted as if watching me. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Last night, I found the final entry in the notebook. It was written on the back cover, the ink smudged and frantic, as if he'd written it in a hurry. "I understand now. They don't want me. They want her. If you're reading this, you have to stop. Don't look for me. Don't let them see you." My breath caught as I read it. My first instinct was to throw the notebook across the room, but I couldn't let go of it. I turned, feeling the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing against me, and there it was. Just outside the window, a shadow, impossibly tall, staring back at me through the glass. I don't know what they are, or why they want me. All I know is that Noah disappeared trying to keep them away from me. And now that I've been searching for him, I've brought them closer. They're always watching now. I see them when I close my eyes, hear them whispering my name. I thought I could find Noah. I thought I could save him. But the more I search for him, the more I realize I'm the one who's disappearing. Story 5. Has anybody seen this black ambulance thing that's blowing up on TikTok? I thought the videos were staged. I mean, a black ambulance? That was harder to capture on camera than Bigfoot? Driving around my hometown, abducting teens in the dead of night? Yeah, right. If that was true, there'd been missing persons reports, police investigations, grieving parents. In the most watched video, a teenage boy wearing a red hoodie kicked a ball around an empty construction site, while his friends recorded from inside a half-finished office block. "Holy shit there, look there," the guy holding the phone said. The footage went all shaky cam as the kid's friends helped drag him up some scaffolding. Then everybody freaked out about something happening off screen. Really, the video was boring and unmemorable, but that didn't stop the wild speculation in the comments. Who was behind this great mystery? Aliens? Vampires? Politicians operating illegal underground organ farms? Nobody knew what happened if you got caught, only that you disappeared forever. How anybody knew this was unclear. I was in the final year of a journalism degree and starving on a diet of unpaid internships that paid me in a wealth of experience. Anytime I asked about actual work, the staff threw quotes about entitlement in my face. I was reminded, again and again, how us kids these days are allergic to putting in the hard work. But then the editor of my city's largest news site came to give my class a guest lecture. This was a lady who reported from the front lines of war zones before catching a knee full of shrapnel. Now she'd taken a desk job and was helping expose a children's hospital that cremated several bodies before the parents got their chance to say goodbye. She said they were hungry for writers who could connect with Gen Z and encouraged us to submit samples, anything, within reason, that helped them engage with a younger market. And what were all the kids talking about? That's right, the black ambulances. I figured the subject would make a tasty piece about how easily you can spread bullshit online. I reached out to the group behind most of the vids, told them I knew they were faking and that, if they let me tag along, I'd write an article about them. Hell, I'd even make them sound all heroic. So on a cold night, me and two wannabe influencers hung out on a dark path that wrapped beneath a concrete bridge. Their eyes. After 5 minutes listening to them brag about their follower counts, I was already planning a different article about how the lengths people go to for fame. The younger guy pointed around the bend and said, "Wait, what's that? Is Dan here already?" The other one said, "But we haven't given him the signal yet." Across the river, the cameraman was still setting up his equipment. The guys threw their backs against the slimy underside of the bridge. I peeked out but couldn't see a thing except the quiet road. Clearly this was them trying to pull one over on me. Just then, footsteps splashed through a pool of rainwater, somewhere close. The two guys exchanged a look and then scrambled in opposite directions. The truth is, I wasn't convinced by their performance, but I also didn't want to get jumped for my phone. There was a stairwell on the far side of the bridge. I hurried up the slippery steps, dirty leaves crunching beneath my boots, and got headed off at the top by two figures dressed all in black, their faces hidden beneath motorcycle helmets. I paused, chuckling, and said, "Okay guys, very fun." Before I could finish, an aerosol can triggered inches from my face. Then everything cut to black. I woke up in a warehouse, my brain all mushy. The roof was 50 feet high, and I was surrounded by strange medical equipment and curtains on sliding rails. I tried to move, but my wrists and ankles were strapped to a wheelchair. I didn't realize I'd been gagged until my calls for help came out all muffled. Behind me, a curtain slid back. Then a masked doctor wheeled an old, seriously ill man in front of me. He looked so frail his bones stood out beneath the fluorescent lights, and his spine curved forward at such an extreme angle that it exposed a tangle of gray chest hair beneath his blue hospital gown. His eyes locked onto me from within their dark hollows. I yelled for the doctor's attention. Ignoring me, the bastard plugged tubes into the old man, too. Some hooked directly into the medical equipment, but others the doctor jabbed into my arms. Only then did it hit me that I was also in a medical gown. Were the theories true? Was I about to become an unwilling organ donor? I screamed and thrashed against the restraints, unable to break free. As the old man laughed, his stale denture breath blasted me in the face. The doctor stood back and flicked a switch on an odd device. Then a shudder ripped through my entire body. There were two clear plastic bags, one on my left, which slowly filled with a black, oozing substance, and one on my right, which swelled with transparent fluid. With his work complete, the doctor disappeared behind the curtain. I studied my surroundings. The only sounds were the steady hum of the medical equipment. I rocked from side to side, then back and forth, trying to twist my arms free. "Calm down, Snowflake," the old man said with an impatient sigh. "You're not going anywhere. And this is going to take a while." I screamed into the gag. "Are you going to do that the entire time?" I caught the condescension in his voice, but was too busy freaking out to care. "Look, if I take that gag out, will you simmer down?" I couldn't see any other obvious way out of that mess. I nodded frantically. After he slipped the gag beneath my chin, I said, "What the hell is going on? Just let the treatment do its work." "Treatment? What treatment?" "The revitalized treatment." He announced each word carefully like an annoyed schoolteacher. "The what?" "We're doing a transfusion," he said, sighing impatiently. "I'm old, I'm sick, and I need a piece of your youth. Just a teensy piece. No need to cry about it. My what? Youth. Your youth. I swear, kids these days, he said, rolling his neck in circles. Those phones have fried your brains. A treatment's safe as houses, and it hurts about as much as a bee sting, so quit being such a fairy and take it like a man. Several machines beeped. Aries. I heard some kind of pump kick to life. Then the liquid in the 2 bags bubbled away. The room and everything in it became white and fuzzy, as if filling with a sudden fog. My eyes. I cried. What's happening to my eyes? They're probably ruined because you play video games all day. As the machines beeped and whirred, the veins in my hands became red and swollen, and the vertebrae in my back cracked, one after the other. My shoulders hunched forward, against my will, and next time I thrashed against the restraints, an awful bolt of pain ran down my spine. Please, it hurts. Whatever you're doing, please stop. The old man leaned back with satisfaction. I swear, your generation aren't happy unless you've got something to bellyache about. It was like my joints caught fire. Deep wrinkles webbed through my hands, running up my arms, and the skin peeled away in giant flakes. A sticky yellow fluid seeped out of my mouth, ran down my chin and onto my lap. I cried for help again and was surprised by how much gravel there was in my throat. In a whiny voice, the old man said, "My back, my eyes. I suppose you're going to start crying about house prices too?" His voice sounded so much softer now. I blinked until my vision stabilized and squinted hard. The bones in his face and neck had become less defined. His liver spots faded too, and those dark bags beneath his eyes, gone. The shape-shifting man flexed his biceps and rotated both feet, as if using them for the first time. Meanwhile, I felt my insides shrivel up. If you'd slit my belly, the organs would have been gray and unhealthy. When the machines beeped and fell quiet, the doctor returned to unplug the rejuvenated man, who straightened his spine and drew a deep, satisfied inhale. "You fucking prick," I rasped in an awful liquid wheeze. "What the fuck have you done to me?" "See, that's the problem with your generation," he sneered, "always blaming somebody else for your problems." With that, the masked doctor faced me, shook up a canister, and then triggered it in my face. I woke up in a tiny bedroom, all neutral colors. Very little decoration. I tried sitting up, praying the experience had all been a nightmare, but that turned out to be a difficult task. Rolling my feeble body off the mattress took 5 minutes. I hobbled. Toward a mirror on the far wall, where a ghoul with thin gray hair and sunken features stared back at me. I knocked on the door, waited, knocked again, took a breather. Finally, 2 nurses appeared. I told them I needed help, that I was a 21-year-old man who'd been a guinea pig in some sick experiment. They listened with patronizing sweetness, then took me by the hand and dragged me back to bed, where they fed me pills that made me drift off to sleep. And since then, they haven't let me leave. It's like I'm in a waiting room, ready to die. Wherever I am, I've got limited contact with the outside world. Eris. It's taken days to get this story jotted down. Either the staff here think I'm senile, or they're part of the conspiracy. So far, it's impossible to tell, but if anybody can help blow the lid on this black ambulance thing, please message me, because I need to undo whatever those bastards did to me before it's too late. Story 6. My company is studying faster-than-light travel. We need to scrap the plans immediately. Faster-than-light travel seems like a great idea on paper. Questions. Get everywhere you need to go in a snap, especially if you're exploring the depths of space. The bad thing is that when you're moving faster than light, all you're left with is darkness, with nothing around to keep what's hiding in it at bay. Man lives in the light for a reason, and we've been discovering that the hard way. What follows are years' worth of research notes that I've stolen. Now, not a single doubt in my mind that I'll be shuffled off by some men in black within the next 24 hours. Hell, they'll probably be here in the next 10 minutes once this finishes uploading. If you read this, please know that those of us who were involved just wanted to make things better. We thought if we discovered faster travel, we could get a jump on exploration, colonizing new worlds for humanity to thrive on. That's all we wanted. Prosperity for everyone. I don't know what might happen in the future, but I leave one simple request for everyone. Stay in the light. They'll probably keep working on this, but for the love of everything, for your safety, stay. Even a flashlight, if you have it. I know. I can still hear the whispers from dark corners, calls from shadows on the ground. They're always closer than you think. Time's up. The upload is ready. There's a lot of scientific jargon, but I've gone through and tried to make a more concise edit to get the point across. For anyone more interested, I've put up the raw files that can be sorted through. Look, I'm not trying to make a name for myself with this. I just don't think those that lost their lives should have done so in vain. Something awful is waiting just outside the light for us, and those it already took Wouldn't want anyone innocent to suffer too. Stay safe. Stay in the light. Godspeed. The 9th of March, 1972. A letter from Dr. James Neely to Avarice Corp. CEO Matthew Puller. Matthew, while I greatly appreciate the opportunity, I must say I have some issues with your orders. Science, as you've seen from the advances in the past few years, takes time. Breakthroughs happen in a matter of seconds, but the preparation that goes towards those takes decades. Putting men on the moon was merely a stepping stone, and the prospect of light-speed travel is something that I have dedicated my life to. That said, our research simply cannot move at the speed of light, much less the speed you want it to. Under your directive, we have lost no less than 3 test flights. At no point have we been prepared for these, forced to push our research far past any safe phase. I'm sure you know we've lost lives in the process as well, with the first ship exploding before it could leave Earth's general area, combusting as it passed 5 units of gravitational force. The second made it through the initial run, though never hit light speed. However, it was unable to make the journey back due to a fuel leak. The third, meanwhile, resulted in the death of the test pilot, as his body was unable to withstand the immense amount of force as the ship reached near light speed. Matthew, do you know what it's like to talk to a man who knows he's going to die? We stayed on communications with the second pilot for 15 hours until he ran out of air, finally passing out slowly as a mercy. We brought in a priest to say last rites over radio to him. His final rasps, as he struggled for oxygen, will haunt me to my dying day. I write this as the lead researcher on this project. Let us proceed on our own timetable, so as to minimize the loss of human life as well as research costs. I realize how important this is, and just how badly you want to be the first to reach this amazing milestone. But please, please, make sure we do it ethically. I'm afraid that if you cannot make these demands, I and the rest of the team will be forced to leave, and you'll have to find a whole new research division. Dr. Neely, January 15th, 1977. Lab notes of Dr. James Neely. The first test flight was successful. Solaris, a speed-of-light-capable ship, was launched precisely 1 week ago. It was able to traverse space between Earth to Mars in approximately 24 minutes, including acceleration. Issues with dipping out of light speed at 2 instances as the accelerator stuttered. The return trip took 26 minutes, suffering another accelerator issue that caused it to lose speed 3 times. States. Despite this setback, the results are magnificent, and the crew on board, Air Force captains Spencer, Mullins, and Peters, all came back in pristine health with no side effects. Physical, that is. I'm including here my debriefing notes with all 3 men. Though they mostly are in high spirits, Mullins has shown some aversion to sunlight since his return. The other 2 have not exhibited this or any other symptoms. Transcripts follow. Captain Mullins, are you feeling all right? You haven't left the lab or living quarters since returning from the flight. No. Just had an odd migraine I can't seem to shake. If it's too bright, I feel like I may throw up. Your scans came back looking completely normal, so there doesn't seem to be any issue. Would you like to talk about what happened during the flight? All things considered, sir, it was uneventful. The acceleration up to speed of light had the hiccups with the accelerator, but I believe that's just a kink that can be worked out over more successful flights. Very well, you're dismissed. Please send Captain Peters in next if you don't mind. Sir. The men switch out. Captain Peters taking the seat formerly occupied by Mullins. Sir. Is Mullins all right? He's looking pretty pale. I was hoping you could shed light on that, Captain Peters. Can you walk me through what happened up there? Well, jump to light speed was about how I expected. Everyone was in high spirits, but the accelerator hiccups were what started to throw us off. First one happened at about the halfway point of acceleration. Second happened just after we hit speed of light, and it took us about 5 minutes to ease back up to that rate. When we got to it, though, damn, everything outside was like a blur. Did Mullins start acting strange at all during the voyage or return flight? On the return, he started mumbling to himself after we hit light speed the first time. Something about the dark finding a way in through the cracks. But it was maybe half a second before we lost speed again. Nothing after that? If we're being honest, I think it was him that dropped us out of light speed. Again. It was like his eyes were blank when he did it, as if he were sleepwalking or something. Didn't happen again after that, and he didn't mention anything about what he said. Thank you for your time, Peters. End transcript. I'm going to keep up observation. We're working on the accelerator still, hopefully making it easier to make the light speed jump in only seconds eventually, as opposed to the timely process it is right now. I'll be adding updates to this file as we go. January 17th, 1977. No further issues with Mullins. He's been out and about with the others, even joined in with the division celebration party last night. Hopefully he doesn't have alcohol poisoning now. The 7th of May, 1979. Research notes of Dr. Neely. Another breakthrough. We've hit a massive leap with our engine technology using a form of nuclear fission. Now we can accelerate to not only the speed of light in seconds, but go beyond it, finally realizing faster than light travel. We haven't put it into a manned craft yet, of course, but used some unmanned rockets to test it. Everything's held together so far, but I want to be sure before sending the captains up in this one. We need to make sure the craft sent up will be able to withstand the forces acting on it and be able to keep them alive through the process. It's going to be a while, but we're going to make sure it's done right and done well. December 13th, 1981. It's finally ready. The engine was just the first step in getting a manned flight into the air. We had to completely redesign any sort of craft we had. A couple of small-scale animal flights were done, but the poor souls never survived the return trip. Turns out we needed to completely redo the temperature and radiation shielding. Doing that while maintaining a flyable craft was the hard part. We got it though, and the first flight goes up tomorrow. Captains Peters, Mullins, and Spencer are all due to make the jump first thing in the morning. They've already gone through the preliminary launch, and I'm happy to say I went with them. Not that I'm making the jump, of course. No, turns out the Avarice Corporation has some major pull. Suppose shady government contracts will give you that, if you use it. Cue my surprise when they told me that myself and some other researchers would be able to set up here on Skylab. Turns out the Skylab that we and the public knew of, the one that crashed into the ocean a couple years back, was just some old prototype satellites. They kept it up here, though, with some upgrades that made it invisible to the Soviets. I must say, it's much nicer up here than the previous iterations. Lots of fantastic upgrades. Anyway, we'll be supervising the flight and return from up here where we can get a front row view. Then, once it's over, they'll take us back down to Earth so we can make further adjustments. I can hardly sleep, partially because of not being in Earth's gravity anymore, but partially because of the excitement. December 16th, 1981. The past 2 days have been a failure that will haunt me even after my dying breaths. I'm just as responsible as the Avarice Corp. Execs who wanted this. Just as responsible as the government officials who commissioned our work. I've damned 3 good men due to my negligence, and for that I am sorry. We set up at the viewing window to watch the flight as the captains took off. Pilot. Peters was piloting this time, with the other 2 serving as both observation and co-pilots in the event of some malfunction or catastrophic issue. Verbal confirmation came in from the pilots. The engine on their ship began to glow bright in the exhaust ports as it stored up energy, the fission causing a nuclear glow in the void of space. Then, like the blink of an eye, they were gone, zipping off across space. The idea was that they would fly out to the edge of the universe, just past Pluto, then turn it around and come on back to us. Until they made it back, we wouldn't have any kind of communications. Try as we might, we couldn't figure out any kind of radio or otherwise that would work while they were at light speed. It seemed almost instantaneous. Maybe 5 minutes passed at the most, and then they were back. The ship, though, it looked rough, like it had been through decades of wear and tear, lost out in the darkness of space, and banged up by whatever debris floated by. It docked on Skylab, but none of the pilots came through the airlock when it was secured. Finally, I worked up the courage to open the door from our side. The smell hit me first, and it was like nothing I've ever had the misfortune of smelling before. Putrid, the stench of excrement and death, overpowering. It took everything in me not to throw up in zero gravity, though it was more out of fear of having my own vomit float back into my face. I held my nose, moving forward slowly as I tried to find what happened. Spencer was the first one visible. What was left of his body was sitting there in his chair still, though there wasn't much to call a body anymore. Bones were visible, with flesh hanging off in tattered chunks that looked as though they had been torn off by ravenous teeth. I soon saw that was the case, as Peters was locked in one of the computer compartments, mumbling to himself, blood covering his face and mouth, staining his teeth. Mullins was sitting in the 3rd seat up front at the console, one of his legs missing, torn off right below the knee. His eyes were wide, likely in shock. The men looked older than when I had seen them only half an hour before. Hair now gray, eyes sunken, and hard lines in their faces. The 2 living ones were thin, almost like a prisoner of war after being freed from captivity. Peters screamed when he saw me, rage and terror in his eyes. He tried hiding from us, pressing himself into his seat as far as he could. Mullins kept staring forward blankly, off into the darkness of space beyond his window, looking into nothing and everything at the same time. We got an emergency shuttle sent out from Earth to bring us back. But in the meantime, I did what I could to talk down the 2 men. It didn't go well, And eventually when backup got there, we had to strap them down and float them into the rescue shuttle. They were nearly unintelligible, but Peters kept screaming about a coffin beyond light. The shuttle got us back home to Earth, thank God. But that was just the beginning of our problems. When we tried to get them from the shuttle to the building, both started screaming bloody murder on seeing sunlight. Peters was about to be wheeled out on a stretcher by medics and managed to throw himself in a way that flipped the entire thing over, right back into the shuttle. Mullins just shrieked the entire time we were prepping him to move, finally leading to the decision to do alternate transport. They backed an ambulance up to the shuttle door, no way for sunlight to get in, and transferred them over before driving them to the medical facility parking garage and getting them out there. Considering Spencer's remains couldn't scream at us, we didn't try moving it any different way. We didn't have any kind of body bags up there either, so he had been wrapped in one of the thermal blankets and transported that way. We put him on a gurney and wheeled it out of the shuttle, into the sunlight, and suddenly there's this ungodly scream and smoke rising up from inside the blanket. Sunlight managed to hit the body, making it hiss and steam before bursting into flame. I swear to God, I don't think it was necessarily him that was screaming. No, it was something else. Because within seconds, the darkest plume of smoke I had ever seen erupted from the blanket and dissipated into thin air. Only his remains were left on the gurney, just charred now. We got him to an autopsy table and determined his death was the result of massive trauma and blood loss, which was pretty obvious from the get-go, if we're being honest, considering much of him had been torn to pieces. Peters and Mullins have been under observation since we got back. Both are in deep hysteria, with Peters still going on about some coffin and how it was going to open soon. Mullins just sat there, staring ahead at the wall, only demanding that the lights be turned off wherever he was. Peters did the same, practically knocking out the bulbs in his room, saying that the light was going to hurt him. We had some security cameras on the ship that I'm having pulled so we can see what the hell happened. We'll update when I get the footage and have a chance to thoroughly review it. From the records of Dr. James Neely, December 20th, 1981. I'm pulling the plug on these experiments. There's no chance in hell we mess with faster than light travel anytime in the foreseeable future. I still don't know what the root cause of all this was, but we're cutting it until we can find out, thoroughly and definitively, what the hell happened here? The footage I pulled from the ship feed only left me with more questions. There wasn't much to it, and half of it was, I don't know, degraded. It was like something had destroyed it. Considering Mullins finally started talking though, I don't know that we're gonna need it. Everything looks normal as they're making prep for the jump, but once they actually hit light speed, everything changed. It's around then that the degradation started being obvious, with the three men all in their chairs at the main consoles. As soon as they hit speed though, three more people appear in the footage. Nothing defining on them, just tall, almost shadows, standing right behind each man as they hit light speed. It stays like that for about 2 minutes, these figures just standing there, before the footage finally cuts out into static. It never comes back on after that. Mullins had a while where he was clear last night, said he wanted to speak to me, but only in the dark. I clarified that I would need to record what he said, and he reiterated the no lights rule. I agreed, foregoing even a small flashlight for note-taking for the sake of getting answers. It was dark, with only his vague silhouette visible sitting across the table from me. What follows is my conversation with him. How's your leg feeling? I can still feel it, even with it not being there. I can still feel them gnawing on it too. Them? Was it Peters who took it? No, he didn't do any of that. It was the shadows, the dark. I'm afraid I don't quite follow, Captain Mullins. You sent us up there with a mission, right? To go faster than the speed of light. A whole new avenue of travel that could make human lives better, right? Take something that would normally be years of travel time and cut it down so we all have more time to build a new world, free in the light of the sun. Sure, yes. We wanted to find a means of travel through space to, hopefully, find new worlds that humans could build and live on. Doctor, do you know what happens when you move faster than light can travel? I'm assuming I don't know. You're left in just the dark. They're finally able to catch up. No light to stop them. They came in right through the windows. At first, we thought it was a trick of the eyes, gravity and speed warping what we were seeing. It was like the darkness outside the windows was pushing over itself to get through, bending the glass and plastic as it pushed. Well, eventually it figured out it couldn't get in and started, I don't know, feeling its way around. It searched out a spot where it could crawl through, the smallest little crack in the paneling, between the window and the frame. A slightly loose screw, it made its way in. God, it was like it moved in slow motion. Looked like smoke at first, that's why Spencer got up. He thought there was a fire going somewhere under the floor panels. Went to get the fire extinguisher and stepped through the wisps of darkness coming out of the ground. That was it. All it took was for them to touch him, and he just stopped right there. What did he do next? Just stood there for a second. Then he attacked Peters. Jumped at him, tried forcing him off the console. He hit the accelerator, pushed it to the damned limit, and when that jump hit, Peters was able to knock him back in his seat. We both jumped up and tied him down, had some duct tape we situated away, and got him secure to his chair. By the time we got that done, though, we had been at the max speed for, God, it was probably only minutes, but it seemed like hours, days even. Peters sat back down and eased off the speed until we were steady drifting. Spencer was just screaming at us the entire time, telling us we still had further to go. Now, not really sure where the hell he was planning on taking us. But, well, I'm afraid to know what could have been further out after what we saw. How far out did you end up, Captain Mullins? When we finally stopped, my gauge read 2.9 million light years. Not in Kansas anymore, that's for fucking sure. Fascinating. You must have left the Milky Way galaxy in that case. What did you see?
Not a damn thing, just darkness. Big, empty darkness far as the eye could see. The only light came from the stars behind us. Light years away at this point. There was nothing to speak of. Not a single star, for the foreseeable distance in front of us. I checked our navigation. We managed to overshoot the Andromeda galaxy completely, so I tried to get us lined back up to make the jump back. Peters was busy trying to get some kind of distress signal out for a second, but then he suddenly just stopped. Do you know why? If I had to guess, sir, it's because of what was floating by outside our window. What? It had to be miles away from us, but the damn thing was huge. Probably the size of a planet. I'm just amazed we didn't get sucked into it. It had to have its own gravity as big as it was.
Was it? It looked like it was made out of stone. Reminded me of those old coffins you would see in horror movies. Carved stone. A giant slab on top to make sure whatever was inside stayed inside.
That wasn't enough for whatever was in this thing, though, I guess. It had chains all around the thing. Just these massive links of metal covering every possible inch. Wrapped right around it so tight it had made notches in some of the areas on the stone. It was just barely visible in the light shining from the Milky Way far behind us. But I swear those chains, they were shining like they were just smithed. Not a blemish on them, reflecting the little bit of light that made it this far out. Chains? But what could make chains that large? God himself, I guess. Sir, I don't know what else to tell you. I know what I saw. Yes, I'm not doubting you, and I appreciate your honesty. I'm just having a bit of trouble wrapping my head around the concept. You and me both, sir. Think it broke Peter's brain seeing it. Poor guy kinda just shut down. I managed to get us turned around. Spencer was screaming at me still, telling me we still needed to go further. Something about opening the way ahead. I tuned him out best I could and got us fixed in the right direction, hit the thruster, and got us back up to light speed as quick as I could. Were there issues with the return trip? As soon as we hit faster than light, yeah. Whatever had attached itself to Spencer sprang right out of him. It was like darkness that was made solid. Looked like an octopus's tentacle reaching out of him. Sounded like he was choking for a second before it came right out of his mouth. Stabbed through my leg and started ripping its way in. Hurt like hell.
To Peters? Well, I was a little preoccupied with my situation, but I saw more tendrils work their way in between the panels outside, the dark moving in just like it did to Spencer. But this time it latched onto Peters. He threw himself over me, trying to get to the thruster. At first I figured he was trying to take us out of light speed, turn us around or something. He hit it forward though, back to the top speed. I fucking let him at that point. I had another issue to take care of. Your leg? I could feel it inside, felt like worms in my damn veins, working their way up trying to get from there to my head. Carrot. I knew if they made it all the way up that it was over. There was no way I would be able to think clearly if they got to me like they did the others. So what did you do? There was a toolkit for repairs in one of the side compartments, where we kept some of the spare computer parts for navigation. Got the hacksaw out of there and started cutting while I still could.
Peters let you? Shit. I had to knock Peters over the head with a hammer to get him to leave me alone. Yes. He jumped after me, teeth going for my neck practically. Knocked him right on the forehead. Locked him up in that same compartment and kept going. Sawed through as much of the skin as I could. Then used the hammer to break the bone. Twisted it off. I'm sure I only lived because of the adrenaline and shock of the situation, but finally made my way back to the thruster and took us out of warp speed. And that was when you arrived back outside of Skylab? I fucking wish. No. The way he hit the thruster, it jammed in light speed. I had to figure out a way to get it out before things got even worse. How did you manage to fix it? The old-fashioned way. I hit it with a hammer. That dropped you out of faster than light speed? Slowly but surely. Judging by the gauge I had, we were going at least 1,000 times the speed of light, so it took a few minutes to drop it back down. The thing is, even going faster than light, in the opposite direction, I swear when I looked out the window it was still there. The coffin? Yeah, the coffin.
It was like it was the one constant even as stars and planets flew by in fractions of blinks. It was just there. Except since we were traveling faster than light,
There was nothing to reflect off of it now. I swear it was doing the opposite of glowing, like from the little crack under the slab and hairline fractures on the surface where the chains were gripping it tight. It was absorbing in whatever stray light was out there. For a second, I could swear that we were being drawn in with it. Whatever little bits of light coming off the shuttle drawn to it. I hobbled around the cabin as best as I could and turned off every light possible, trying to hide from it. Whatever was inside, though, it knew. It knew we were there.
I think it let us go on purpose. We dropped below light speed, not far outside the edge of our solar system. I saw the other planets pass by pretty quick before I pulled the brakes hard once Skylab was in view. You managed to dock the ship.
Huh. Well, color me impressed. I don't remember much after seeing Skylab. Think that's around the time everything started to go blank. Adrenaline wore off, I guess. Last thing I remember was the sun pouring in through the window. Spencer, whatever was in Spencer, didn't like that. The darkness came back. Started eating at him, trying to find a way out of the light. Is he doing okay now? I'm afraid Captain Spencer passed away before reaching Earth. There. Damn shame. The head wound has taken some recovery time, but he's getting there.
Good. Good to hear.
I know this seems bleak, Doctor, but I think this is only a bump in the road. I think we're on the verge of something big here. End transcript. My conversation with Captain Mullins ends there as I run out of tape and excuse myself. As I open the door, bright fluorescence from the hallway spill into the room, falling squarely on him. Only the dark silhouette is still visible, though, as if the man himself has been consumed by darkness. I received word later in the day that Peters was awake and wanted to speak to me. I visit him in a hospital room. He's requested almost the opposite of Captain Mullins, demanding that the lights stay on at all times. Bright fluorescent bulbs underscore the hard lines on his face, now clean of blood. A line of stitches runs across his forehead, accentuating where Mullins must have struck him. Good evening, Captain Peters. I'm glad to see you're in better shape. You can see it, right? I'm sorry. You can see it right there. He starts waving his hand around beside his bed, pointing at something on the ground. I need a flashlight. Please, bring me a light. I reach for the exam light on the wall, bringing the coiled cord over and shining it over him. He sits up, letting it shine over his hand and project a shadow on the ground. Oh, thank God, it's still outside. Captain Peters, do you remember what happened up there? Mullins attacked me, threw me in the compartment. He's fucking dangerous, sir. You've got to get him locked up. Captain Mullins says that you attacked him, Captain Peters. You mean to tell me something else happened? He tried to drive us right into that coffin, sir. Bastard was going to run us into it at light speed so whatever was inside could come out. They got him. They got Spencer. Then they got him. Slow down, Captain. What do you mean by they? Mine is still outside, sir. They didn't get me. I saw it take over the other two, though. Please, Peters. I need you to explain calmly. We made the jump to faster than light, right? And when we were in the jump, I looked back behind to speak to them. I could see my shadow projected on the wall and ceiling behind me. The console lights. I was the only one they hit. The other two, when I looked back, their shadows were taking them.
They were in their seats, but there were these huge, beings made of pure darkness standing behind them. I saw Spencer's grab him. It grabbed at his face, holding his mouth open. Then it just kind of stepped in, like it was putting on a human suit. Mullins tried to grab at him, but I moved at the last second. The light that hit him kept it from taking him right away, I think. I don't know. Spencer started attacking us then, and we had to tie him down to the chair. He managed to grab Mullins' leg, though. I think that's how it got him. I pulled us out of light speed before anything else could happen. I'm not following, Captain Peters. Spencer's shadow took him over, sir. I think that's what it was, at least. The dark. When you go faster than light, all you're left with is the dark. There's no more boundary between us and our shadows. They took over Spencer and started working their way through Mullins. When we stopped and saw the coffin into his leg, whatever got into his leg started working its way up. He wanted to open the coffin up. I snuck up on him with the saw, hoping I could get it out of him. He told me he cut his own leg off. He probably wants to go back up there too, doesn't he? You can't listen to him, sir. Please, believe me. I took his leg off, and that slowed him down enough so I could get us turned around. Then he hit me with the hammer and threw me in the compartment. God, I must be the luckiest son of a bitch alive. The lights in there were probably on when he shut me in. Only thing that kept this bastard out. He looks down to his own shadow on the ground again, grimacing in fear. I swear, sir, shine a light on him. He won't have one anymore. It's inside him now. I think you should rest, Captain Peters. I'll come back by tomorrow and check in. End transcript. I must admit, his words have left me shaken. I can't get rid of this feeling of paranoia. Despite the bright sun outside, weather surprisingly warm, I shiver upon catching sight of my own shadow on the ground. I don't know yet that I'll try what he's asked with Captain Mullins. Perhaps I just need sleep. It has been a few days since I've had more than a couple hours of rest. Misfortune seems to have my number today, though, as I've received a letter from my benefactor. Mr. Puller is insisting that trials continue, whether with new pilots or with Mullins going back up. He also warns that I may get a visit from some men with the collective in the next few days, and that I'm not to speak with them under any circumstance. It's obvious at this point that he only has his own preservation in mind, and these gentlemen may threaten that. I'm looking forward to having a chat with them. December 21st, 1981. Some strange individuals arrived today, requesting to speak to Captain Mullins and Peters. They've identified themselves as agents from the collective. To tell the truth, I'm giving them everything. I don't trust Puller or anything that Avarice may have its mind set on at this point. They requested to speak to Peters first, and received his story firsthand. When it came time to meet with Mullins, they requested that I go in with them. Something tells me they know more than they're letting on. Now, when entering Mullins' room, I can see that he's gone a few steps further now to ensure no light gets in. Glass from the fluorescent tubes above littered the ground of his small room, making uncomfortable crunching noises as we stepped in. Upon flipping the switch, none of them came on, with only a loud crack heard from one of the still intact sockets that was desperately trying to route electricity. He demanded we leave, insisting that no lights be turned on him. From what I could tell, he was in the corner of the room, only a dark, amorphous shadow on the wall to give any hint that someone was in there. One of the agents had shown me before going in that they were holding a small handheld light, over 3,000 lumens in brightness. Said it was enough to light up underground caves when they had to occasionally search for lost artifacts, though what kind of artifacts he was talking about eludes me. When he flashed it on, Mullins shrieked. He jumped from the corner, launching himself up almost to the ceiling where he stuck himself to the wall, like a vampire evading the light. I expected to see pale, waxy skin like from an old Dracula movie, but instead every inch of skin visible on him seemed to just absorb the light. He was a being of pure darkness, light oozing around him like it was bleeding into an event horizon. The agent continued shining the light, telling him to come down and he would lessen the brightness. Mullins refused to comply, leading him instead to crank it higher. Eventually, the former captain fell from his perch near the ceiling, his face finally visible in the bright handheld light. His eyes were gone. Hell, his entire face at that. In its place was a singularity, drawing in all the light it could from the small handheld. The agents didn't say too much, simply keeping the light on him as they wheeled in a small gurney with a box on top, sliding his body into it while doing their best not to touch it directly. Through the whole process, even outside of his being cloaked in darkness, something didn't seem right. I didn't realize it until going back in my mind now, but the entire time the bright light was on him, there was no shadow cast from his body. It's like the light simply went right through him, no semblance of a human or even animal there in his stead. They took him away and transferred Captain Peters to their custody. I'm sure Puller is going to jump down my throat when he hears about this, but at this point, he can kiss my ass. The agents that were here gave me a number to call, said they may have some work for me in their aerospace division. I don't know that I'm going to call them though. I'd live. After all that, I think it's time I retire. Someplace sunny sounds nice. Perhaps I'll move between the poles. Chase the midnight sun, as it were. Anything to ensure my shadow stays behind me.